And welcome to the launch of the proceedings of the Sri Lankan English Language Teacher Educator Conference 2020. This evening's session will last approximately an hour and a half and will include presentations on 4 sub-themes of the conference by the plenary speakers and a panel discussion on current issues and future directions in teacher education in Sri Lanka. Please include any questions or comments you may have in the chat section, and we will address as many as we can in the Q&A session. This event is being recorded and will be available for viewing and sharing. To begin, let me request Jill Caldicott, Country Director of British Council, to start the proceedings. Jill?
Oh, good evening, everyone. It's wonderful. Online environment. I can only say that welcome to this launch of the proceedings of the SLELTEC Conference 2020. The conference, as you know, had the theme of English language teacher education in the 21st century. And from a personal perspective, it was one of the very last events that I attended before Sri Lanka went into lockdown due to COVID-19. And so I feel that it's all the more important that just a few months later, we're able to reconnect with you, even though it is in this online environment. So the participants, they were teacher educators, and they came from across the island, from both the in-service and pre-service sector, from the NCOEs, the teacher training colleges, the teacher centres, the RESCs, and in addition, we had provincial in-service advisors attending as well. And of course, we were so pleased to welcome the participants that we had from Afghanistan and from Nepal, and speakers from the US as well as the UK. So when we launch the papers in a little while, these you will find represent the scope and the breadth and indeed the depth of the presentations and discussions that took place, and covering themes of digital trends, observation, feedback, teaching literature, and the challenge of speaking and listening. They are a very impressive collection of papers from, as we know, the very first conference for teacher educators in Sri Lanka. So I think, as you'll all know, the British Council has been in Sri Lanka for 70 years, and you can see the logo up in the background there. And from the very beginning, conferences and training for teachers of English was at the heart of our work. And we found that out by looking in our archives. It was one of the very first things that we did here in Sri Lanka. So we feel that SLELTEC represents a really important step in terms of creating a forum for continuing professional development for teacher educators. And so I'd like to thank everybody who's been involved, but especially for the speakers, the participants, the organisers, for all your hard work and dedication that has made all of this possible. Just before I hand back, I would just like to mention a couple of things. That if you want a certificate for participation, there'll be a link that you can access, and if you complete that, you will receive a certificate. And as Minrali said, I mean, please do put your comments and your questions and what you think about it and how its relative importance for you. Please do put those into the comments, into the chat boxes. Okay, thank you very much, and enjoy the rest of the evening.
Thank you, Jill. We asked a variety of participants at the conference what the experience meant for them, and here is what they said.
Sri Lanka English Language Teacher Educators Conference was a fantastic event, and it was a great opportunity to come together with other teacher educators from around Sri Lanka and internationally also from Nepal and Afghanistan to share ideas. And I think that's what I enjoyed the most, was speaking to people during the break times from different places and hearing what they were doing regarding teacher education. And one person from Veyangoda in particular stood out to me, teaching English for a better world.
The conference exceeded my expectations, a very worthwhile experience of sharing knowledge and ideas in the teaching field. It provided a platform to learn about innovative approaches in learning. I truly enjoyed interacting with intellectuals and from people from various countries, and also the keynote speakers were stellar.
Well, SLELTEC gave me an international platform to present my paper on reflective journey of mentoring. The plenaries and sessions were useful to me, for example, giving developmental feedback and linking literature to the life of interest of Alpha generation. I found ELT situation in Sri Lanka and Nepal are similar. For example, the challenges of teaching speaking and listening. I made new friends who are now virtually linked. And finally, the musical concert and hospitality is memorable.
The conference is significant because it was the first of its kind in Sri Lanka. It was a wonderful opportunity to meet people who share your same experience locally as regionally. So talking to them, sharing their best practices. So I gathered a lot of knowledge and skills. And the process of preparing for the conference, taking part in it, and then followed up with the proceedings has made me a totally new person. And I'm actually looking forward to the next conference. I'm very much happy with the conference.
I enjoyed the conference for three reasons. Firstly, in the past, when I've worked with projects, I've worked with different groups of trainers, for example, from the teacher training colleges or from the regional English support centres, but it was nice for once to have everybody together under one roof. I loved the international dimension of it, meeting colleagues from Nepal and Afghanistan. And also, I've been to a lot of conferences in the past, and I thought in comparison with those, the SLELTEC conference was very well organized and very professionally run.
SLELTEC conference has given me a wonderful opportunity to share the best practices as a trainer in Sri Lanka. And certain sessions were eye-openers for me to face new challenges and the opportunities of the 21st century. Especially learning current issues and future direction in teacher education were super useful for me. And also I enjoyed the venue and the food, and meeting new friends was awesome. Were super useful for me, and also I enjoyed
Okay, I'm sorry for the abrupt end. There must have been a small technical glitch. Thank you to the conference participants who shared their views. Next, we have Leslie Dick, Manager, English Language Training Projects, with the introduction to the proceedings. Leslie?
Thank you, Runali. I'd like to give you some background to the conference proceedings. And as I do this, we're going to show a collage of photographs from the conference itself. The Sri Lankan English Language Teacher Educator Conference, SLELTEC for short, held on the 5th and 6th of March 2020 in MAS Athena in Thulhiriya, Sri Lanka, was jointly hosted and funded by the Ministry of Education and the British Council. It took place, as Jill said, 10 days before the whole country went into lockdown because of the COVID-19 pandemic. It was a lively event where 200 regional and local participants and speakers shared best practice, expertise, and views on a wide-ranging set of topics under the umbrella heading of English language teacher education in the 21st century. Looking back, it was a carefree time with participants mingling freely and making the most of the opportunity in terms of time and space to discuss topics with their peers. We were not to know that post-conference, the world was about to significantly change and the world of teacher education was to undergo a dramatic upheaval in response to the pandemic. The conference itself grew out of the British Council and the Ministry of Education's work with teacher educators in the state sector in Sri Lanka. From 2017, the Improving Teacher Education in Sri Lanka project has been running. This project delivered teacher educator, ELT methodology, and mentoring courses to teacher educators in the pre-service and in-service sectors. A community of practice was set up to help all these teacher educators to share best practice and to give them a forum to collaborate. One of the events they were keen to run was a conference specifically for English language teacher educators. A SLELTEC committee was formed in October 2019 with a mix of colleagues representing the variety of teacher education institutions in Sri Lanka. The conference was the ideal venue for showcasing and sharing the work of both local and regional pre- and in-service teacher educators. English language teacher education in the 21st century was the overall theme. Papers, workshops, and poster presentations were delivered on the 4 sub-themes chosen for their currency in the national and regional context. These were digital trends, observation and feedback methods and techniques, empowering teachers to teach literature, and the speaking and listening challenge. The conference had 3 objectives. Firstly, to demonstrate and share best practice in teacher educator course delivery locally and regionally. Secondly, to showcase the best practice in lesson and session planning from the nationwide competition run the previous December. And thirdly, to compile a conference publication showcasing local and regional best practice. This volume of proceedings fulfills the 3rd objective. Post-conference in April, the keynote and plenary speakers were invited to submit a paper based on their talk. The presenters were similarly asked to submit abstracts of their papers for inclusion in the proceedings. A panel of 6 people representing the British Council, the Ministry of Education, the National Institute of Education, the National Colleges of Education, and the teacher centres evaluated the abstracts and selected 12 papers, 3 on each sub-theme. The proceedings are organised by sub-theme, and within that, first the plenary paper is presented, then the other 3 papers. These will be available on our British Council website post-launch and can be downloaded individually or together. Okay, let me welcome our speakers tonight. Our keynote speaker and our plenary speakers are here today to contribute in 2 ways. First, they will each present on their sub-theme and its relevance to the future of English language teacher education in Sri Lanka. Then they will join in a panel discussion. And you can too by posting questions in the chat. Okay, so let me start by introducing all of the presenters first, and then I will hand over to them. Okay, our first presenter, Dr. Shashikala Asila, Senior Lecturer, Department of English, University of Kelaniya, teaches a range of literature subjects and is working on integrating digital into the humanities subjects. She contributes to the sub-theme of empowering teachers to teach literature. At the conference, she delivered the keynote speech on teaching literature in today's classrooms. Today, she explores teaching literature and its relevance to the future of English language teacher education in Sri Lanka. Our second presenter, Psyche Kennett, is a consultant in education and governance from the UK. She's worked on teacher education, curriculum development, and social inclusion in education in a number of countries, with a focus on teaching English and other second languages. Her association with Sri Lanka spans more than 3 decades. She's currently working for the EU British Council supporting reconciliation processes in Sri Lanka as a language sector specialist. At the conference, she contributed to the sub-theme of observation and feedback methods and techniques, with a plenary on widening the scope of effective observation and feedback. Today, she explores this sub-theme and its relevance to the future of English language teaching in Sri Lanka. Our third presenter, Dr. Bimali Indraratna, lecturer, University of York from United Kingdom. At the conference, she contributed to the sub-theme of the Speaking and Listening Challenge. She started her career as an English language teacher in a remote school in Sri Lanka and has been involved in several teacher training projects. She therefore has first-hand experience of the challenges that teachers face in teaching, listening and speaking in class. She will take those into account in her discussion. Today, she explores the Speaking and Listening Challenge and its relevance to the future of English language teacher education in Sri Lanka. Our last presenter, Karen Waterston, e-learning consultant, British Council, Edinburgh, contributed to the sub-theme of digital trends at the conference. Karen has been involved in the field of educational technology for many years, most recently supporting teachers and teacher educators in the move to online course delivery and teacher training. Another area of interest for Karen is the provision of digital support in low connectivity environments. At the conference, she delivered a plenary on current trends in digital with a practical application in Sri Lanka. Today, she explores digital trends and their relevance to the future of English language teacher education in Sri Lanka. So now I will hand over to our first presenter and conference keynote speaker, Dr. Shashikala Asala.
Hello, good to be here in this virtual launch of the SLELTEC proceedings. And I would like to start off this speech of mine, or the conversation of mine, which should be a conversation rather, about teaching English literature and its relevance to the English language teacher education in Sri Lanka. I think one of the things that we need to understand when we talk about teaching English literature is that it has always been considered or always been seen as this very elitist sphere where people who know English and who are very conversant in English go in to study English literature or go in to teach English literature. But I think what we need to take into account at this point in time is that sometimes people who are also English literature, that is a thing, that is a factor that we need to take into account when we think of a revamping or when we think of introducing English literature into our classrooms today. And to do this, I need to be on our teaching and probably to think out of the box, because I'm very interested in digital and into the English literature. I usually look into digital platforms to entice students and to make students become interested in this field, this vast field called English literature. Incorporating digital into teaching English literature does not necessarily mean showing just a video. It means that you need to think beyond showing a video, beyond showing an audio clip, to understand what the students need. So one of the few things which we need to do is that you need to understand how to into your practices. So to do this, we can do is we can train our English teachers. That is where the teacher educators come in. We can train our teacher educators to be more conversant in digital trends and digital platforms to make them be ready for the classroom, where they need to probably encourage also students to things that I use in my own classrooms is that I have always used these platforms such as easy quizzes that you find on digital platforms like Quizmaster or Kahoot or things like that, where you can engage your students into giving you instant responses, which will again encourage them to be more interested or encourage them to be involved in learning literature. And another thing you have to understand is that in today's developing technology, it's very difficult for students to think of literature as a reading, writing subject. They need to think, or rather they would like to think beyond that. So to do this, you need to use certain techniques that you might find in online platforms, you can find on YouTube or in other platforms that is easily accessible, about dramatizing literature that can be digitized so that people can perform for a digital audience, or people can express stories. To come my last my about teaching literature and digital English literary platform, we need to simply think the box and get teachers be more with the digital technology, with the information to and to entice students to in the field of literature. I think if there are more questions about what I'm talking or what I have spoken so far, I'm ready to take questions at the Q&A. But right now, I would like to hand over. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nashi. And I'd like to start by thanking the British Council for inviting me to be part of this webinar this evening. I presented Widening the Scope of Effective Observation and Feedback at the conference. And also in the proceedings, my paper is divided really into two parts. The first part is the relevance of observation and feedback in an effective way at the individual level, observing individual teachers and lecturers in the classroom. And the second part is the relevance of observation and feedback to program evaluation, where we aggregate scores of a whole cohort of teachers or participants on a training course and look at the group scores and what people have achieved to improve. Both aspects of this kind of effective observation and feedback are based on an agreed set of observable behaviors, which are standardized amongst the observers. We can all agree that this teacher is mastering this criteria on our observation sheet. We can't really aggregate the scores. But also, when one in-service inspector, one's in-service advisor hands over to a new in-service, they also need to be standardized about what they agree is a beginning skill, a developing skill, of a skill. At the individual level, I think I started with the need for the observer not to adopt a poet syndrome where they drop and parachute into a class and then they are gone. Very often observation is limited to just what the teacher teaches and the learners learn during the period, but effective observation has to include an interview with the teacher beforehand, perhaps interviews with the learners after the class too, and with the end. We all know about the ISA who drops into a class and the teacher's taught that class the day before, arranged with her students that, okay, you kids in the front row, when you all raise your hand, but I'll ask you to answer that question and I'll ask someone else. And it's a setup. We don't want that. For it to be effective, we want it to be a real teaching and learning event. And I also talked about the need to give constructive feedback by making that classic sandwich of starting with good points to win the teacher's trust, putting 1 or 2 points to improve, which are expressed in the future tense, so you're not locking the feedback into the past or any sense of blame, and then ending again on a high note. But I also talked about the importance of standardization of observable criteria so that we can aggregate scores which are given across a group of participants at pre-service or in-service level. And the important point there is that we define very qualitative criteria into a quantitative way. I took the example of interpersonal skills. What do interpersonal skills mean? And I talked about how we can break those down into the skills we would want to see in preparation, personal skills of enthusiasm and conscientious, knowing the students, interpersonal skills during the class, so that teacher demonstrates inclusion, making sure not just the front row but the whole class are involved, and facilitating learning in a positive and motivating way, and also quantifying interpersonal skills afterwards in the teacher's ability to receive and build on feedback from the observer. This is just one example of how we might quantify a qualitative skill. When we quantify those skills, then we can begin to measure them, and we can set criteria, we can set grades against those criteria. A score of 1 would be the skill is beginning. A score of 2 for a particular skill means the teacher is developing that skill. A score of 3 means the teacher is using that skill on a regular basis. A score of 4 means the teacher has mastered that skill. Once we give numbers to observe standardized criteria, we can aggregate the scores and then we can analyze them. And the analysis can tell us whether the program is successful. It can also tell us whether which aspects of teaching and learning our teachers need follow-up and further guidance on. I hope you'll enjoy reading it in the conference proceedings. Certainly at the end of this, I'm going to download those proceedings because I'm very curious to see what others have written too. And now I would like to hand over to Bimali.
Thank you, Psyche, and hello, everyone. Happy to join the online session. In my talk, as Leslie mentioned, I spoke about speaking and listening challenge, which is, I think, very important now because Sri Lanka, in the education system, we are going to introduce listening and speaking. So in my talk, I spoke about 5 things. First thing is the non-applicability of native speaker accent model in teaching pronunciation or teaching speaking, because we are in a lingua franca context where we use different accents. So the need today is to make learners aware of different accents and make them be able to understand people with different accents. The second thing I discussed in my talk was again the non-applicability of using a native speaker pronunciation model. Again, like I mentioned earlier, that we are in a world where we use different types of Englishes. So there are different types of people use different pronunciation models. So we don't speak about a native speaker model anymore. Instead, again, we have to make learners aware of different pronunciation practices, and also we have to make them be able to listen to different speakers and understand. So that's something we need as teachers when we introduce listening and speaking, we have to think about. And the third thing I mentioned in my talk was teaching listening, but going beyond the pre, while, post model, where we actually assess speaking, not really assess listening, not really teach how to listen. So in that context, what I have mentioned was that it's very important that we teach them how to listen and show them some listening strategies. For example, if they get when they listen to something and if they can't understand, then what to do next. So using different listening strategies to understand what different speakers say. Again, here it's important that they understand different accents, different pronunciation. So then when they listen to different speakers, that they will be able to understand what they say. The third thing I discussed was teaching speaking and what we should do, especially sometimes when we teach speaking in Sri Lanka. Sometimes we see that the models that we use are not really authentic, and we don't show them speaking issues. Also natural features of speech, for example, hesitations, pauses, back channel. So all these things sometimes we ignore, but it's very important that students understand these natural features of language. So what I mentioned in the talk was that it's important that we bring in natural examples, authentic examples of speech, and let students analyze what natural features are, and then give them confidence that when we speak, we always, even when we speak our first language, we use all these features. So it's fine to use all these features when they speak in a second language, as well as to make mistakes, and also to have pauses, false starts, and all those things. So making learners aware of natural features of speech is very important. And the fifth thing that I discussed was, in this process, how we can make learners independent and increase learner autonomy. And also in that way, we can let them analyze their own speech and find out what the problems that they face. For example, when they listen, what problems that they face and how to overcome problems, what strategies they could use. So learners become autonomous learners, and we also, in that way, we give them confidence to go out of the classroom and listen to natural language and process them. And also when it comes to speaking, how to overcome issues. So they can analyze their own speech and come out with problems, and as well as solutions to overcome the problem. So those are the things that I mentioned in my talk at the conference. Also, I think it's important now in the post-COVID situation, we also have to think about teachers and delivering lessons both face-to-face and online, the distance mode. So all these things need to be taken into consideration when we think of teaching listening and speaking, and also when thinking of training teachers how to teach listening and speaking, and also how to assess listening and speaking. So that's basically what I have covered in the conference. I'd like to answer any questions later on. And now I'm going to hand over to Karen.
Hi, thanks, Bimali, and hello, everyone. It's so exciting to be part of this. The world of digital has brought us together. And thanks, Leslie, and everybody at the British Council for inviting me back again. It seems like such a long time ago when we were together in March, when words like synchronous and Zoom were yet unknown. So I talked in my presentation, which I did from Edinburgh, zooming into Colombo, Sri Lanka. I talked about all things digital. And I think some of the learning over the last few months is now encapsulated with us all being together now of the power of digital. So I talked about the challenges and opportunities for online training. And I first looked at what are the issues with face-to-face training. So face-to-face training, we all know, we all love it, but it has a lot of issues around the reach of people coming from faraway places in Sri Lanka. Some of the roads are not so good, leaving families. It can be quite costly in terms of transport and trainers and logistics, and lots and lots and lots of faxes going back and forwards between offices. It also took a lot of time to organize, and 5 or 3 days of training in one place can be very intense. Lots and lots and lots of things going into your head, and not all of it can be remembered when you're back into the classroom. So for online training, many of these problems can be solved. Online is everywhere. The cloud is all around us. And so those geographical issues that face-to-face training can bring are gone, as if by magic. So there's also less cost in some ways, with no accommodation or food costs or transport costs. And in terms of time, people can learn online at any moment, in shorter chunks and in shorter bursts, over a longer period of time. The digital world is all around us, and it can be more flexible. But how can this be done? So there are a number of different models of online training, words that were very unfamiliar a few months ago, and now are a little bit more familiar. So we can have 100% online model, which means everything is online in your home or an office if you can go there. We can include moderation. And if we have a moderator, it's kind of like a trainer online who is guiding the participants through the training. We can have a synchronous session like we are now, live together, where everyone can communicate with each other. We can also have moderation on forums. We can also have a blended approach, which is a mix of face-to-face and online. So we know that deeper learning takes place when it's in shorter chunks over a longer period of time, and often when the learner or the teacher who's learning can do this at their own pace, as we know people all learn in different ways. We have time to think and apply and reflect when we have more time for the learning to take place over time. So these moderated courses that we do online with the guidance of an experienced moderator or trainer are very effective in addressing those issues of time and pace. We also know that learning happens when connection takes place. So the face-to-face trainer builds community and connection, and this has to happen online as well, and the moderator can do that. So I also in my talk talked about and gave examples of a number of successful British Council programs that have been run online over a few months to a year with hundreds and thousands of teachers. And we looked at what made those particularly successful, and what made them successful was a good course design, which is very important, task design, and the whole course being put together with a lot of thought and planning. Good moderators, like a good trainer, planning, I think we often forget how much work goes into online events. Even this event, there was a lot of things going on in the background, as there are now. There's a whole team making this all happen. And not to forget some technical training that participants need in order to become familiar with the platform and the process and the style of online learning. And looking at Sri Lanka, you've already started down a digital road with WhatsApp groups for teacher educators. And one successful use of a digital tool was with the ISAs using SurveyMonkey as an observation tool, where data was collected very quickly and efficiently in the classroom. So there's a lot of potential. And over the last few months, I think a lot of us have had a learning curve like this. So we've got a lot of experience and learning to draw on amongst ourselves. And I look forward to your questions, the easy questions, by the way. And I'd now like to hand over to Leslie. Thank you for listening.
Okay, that was lovely listening to everybody again, and it took me back to March when we were all at the conference together. Okay, so thank you to all of you. Thank you to Shashi, Saiki, Bimali and Karen. Please stay with us for the panel discussion. And I know that in the comments we have some questions. There's quite a lot of questions from the audience. So hang on in there with us. Okay, the panel is titled Current Issues and Future Directions in Teacher Education in Sri Lanka. It's the same as the conference panel, but I'd like to amend it a little, as a number of the presenters just spoke about, by situating it within the current and hopefully in the not too distant future, post-COVID-19 setting, and in an economy recovering from this pandemic, as I think we would all agree the world in March, when the conference took place, is a significantly different place now. I'll give you about 2 minutes to respond maximum, and will, with my trainer hat on, interrupt you if you run over, okay? So, first question. Can I ask you all to respond to this question from the context of your sub-theme? What do you see as the most important current issue in your topic in Sri Lanka, and what do you see as a way forward? So, Shashi, you spoke about empowering teachers to teach literature. What do you see as the most important current issue in this field in Sri Lanka today, and what do you see as a potential way forward? Shashi? Have we lost her? Are we having technical difficulties? No. Okay, okay, I'm going to move on and we can come back to Shashikala. Okay, let me move on to Saiki. Saiki, you spoke about observation and feedback. What do you see as the most important current issue in this field in Sri Lanka today, and what do you see as a potential way forward?
I think, Leslie, with observation and feedback, very often observers are on different agendas. I don't think that everyone's singing from the same song sheet. I think sometimes the observer is asserting hierarchy. I'm here to evaluate you, or they might be laying knowledge. I'm going to now go through feedback and tell you everything I observed, from your handwriting on the blackboard all the way through to the very last minute of the class, rather than focusing on what's essential or appropriate for that stage of the course. And I think observation can be very, very subjective. But what I what I don't often see is that the real purpose of the observation is for the professional development of the teacher, that the observer is there to facilitate that delivery and teaching. So I think the solution is a much more standardized approach. What we're observing, how we're observing, why we're observing, and how we give feedback. And I think that starts with an agreed set of criteria of what we are observing. And then kind of like a standardization, much like if we were IELTS examiners, that every year we'd come together and watch videos of teachers and agree this is what we would grade it as. So that kind of regular standardization of observers. And finally, I think a greater connectivity amongst observers. So in the National Colleges of Education, we'll see a lecturer giving methodology to a group of teachers, pre-service teachers, who then go to a practice school and are observed by somebody completely different who wasn't in the methodology lecture. So they're talking what's been input and what's being followed up in the classroom is not connected. At an in-service level, like a lot of public service, there's very little handover from one ISA to another. But a new ISA will come in and observe a teacher who's been observed before and maybe start back at the beginning rather than building on the observations of the previous ISA. So standardization over agreed criteria, greater connectivity within the system. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, thanks, Taki. So Bimali, you spoke about the speaking and listening challenge. What do you see as the most important current issue in this field in Sri Lanka today, and what do you see as a potential way forward?
Okay, thanks, Leslie. I see two main challenges in the current situation. One thing is, I think, when it comes to teaching, listening, and speaking, I think we can do that to some extent with some teacher training. But when it comes to assessing speaking, I think that's a big challenge, at least even if we introduce at school level. So who sets standards and preparing rubrics and how to train teachers to use the rubrics and also keeping uniformity. Also, like, even if we go with rubrics, now we have to take into account regional variations, right? Rural schools and schools with more facilities and students with more access. So are we going to use the same rubrics or are we going to go for different ones? And how much teacher training can we provide to assess speaking? I think testing listening might be a bit easier. We might be able to maintain uniformity, some kind of uniformity, but when it comes to testing speaking, I think that's a big challenge. Teaching speaking is already a challenge, but testing speaking is going to be a real challenge in the present context, introducing that, and how much teacher training can we do and how long will it take? The next challenge I see is like in the post-COVID situation. Now we have been talking about teaching, listening, and speaking face-to-face. Now we have to do it not just face-to-face, but probably online as well in a distance mode. So if teachers are our teachers ready to deliver listening and speaking both face-to-face and online? And also, are learners ready? Do they have enough resources, access to online learning or distance learning mode? So how are we going to deliver these lessons, both listening lessons and speaking lessons? And again, assessing, are we going for both face-to-face assessment or online assessment, and how are we going to design this, and also how are we going to deliver this? So those are the main challenges I see in the coming years that Sri Lanka will face when it comes to teaching and assessing listening and speaking. Now, the way forward, I think, is I think there should be pre and in-service teacher training programs, well-designed teacher training programs, probably delivered both again face-to-face and online. Because again, with the post-COVID situation, we might not be able to do the same amount of teacher training face-to-face. So we might have to think of alternatives on how to deliver teacher training. And then again, it comes to designing those online resources and how much effort we need to put in and how much expertise we need. So, but however, I think the way forward is thinking about teacher training, not just in teaching, speaking and listening, but also assessing listening and speaking, at the same time delivering teacher training both face-to-face and online.
Okay, thank you, Bimali. Yeah, it is a challenge, certainly. Okay, so Karen, you spoke about digital trends, a topic that's even more significant now, as we know, than it was at the conference. What do you see as the most important current issue in this field in Sri Lanka today, and what do you see as a potential way forward?
Well, I think, as Bimali mentioned, about moving things online, more and more people are thinking about it. And I think one of the biggest challenges is time and resourcing. It can appear on the outside that an online training course doesn't take that much time to put together, and you put a few materials online and away you go. But there's a huge amount of time that needs to go into planning, creating materials, and training not only the trainers, also the participants. So those, I think, are some of the biggest challenges around the sort of the ideal of what ministries want, or maybe even what the British Council wants, and the reality of the time it takes to do that. And the ways forward are breaking things down into smaller steps, and devoting the time to planning. Sounds easy, but it's
not. Yeah, I'm in the process of doing that at the moment.
I know.
It's certainly not easy at all. Okay, Shashi, we seem to have lost Shashikala for the moment. However, she did answer the question that I put to her. She answered it in the chat. So I'm just going to very quickly read you her answer. She was speaking about empowering teachers to teach literature. So she said she thinks the biggest challenge at the moment is converting traditional teaching methods in English literature onto digital platforms. So it's very similar to what Karen was just talking about. I think that goes for everybody at the moment. We're all struggling with that. I certainly am. Okay, let's move on to another question, which is incredibly linked to what we've just been talking about. And I wonder if I should. I think I will ask it though, because it is very relevant. Okay, so question number 2 is connected to what we've just been talking about. Our world has dramatically changed in the last few months because of COVID-19. And one thing that's impacted all of us has been the shift to more digital technology in our everyday life and also in our work life. Teachers and teacher educators have had to jump headfirst into a world of digital platforms, as we get Zoom, Microsoft Teams, Google Classroom, all the different ones that are out there. Digital technology has come into its own and become an incredibly valuable educational tool, whether it's for direct delivery of teacher training or teaching and training, or for collecting data, or for sharing resources. And we've all had to experience a steep learning curve to keep up. On the positive side, an education system such as Sri Lanka has huge potential for digital development and an education for all scenario. While on the negative, it's currently still a low resource environment, and digital technology raises the issues of exclusion and inequity. I'd like to ask the panel what they see as the various uses of digital technology in teacher education and what their implications in a post-COVID-19 Sri Lanka might be. How can they be harnessed to further develop teacher education, and how can they be prevented from furthering exclusion and inequity? And I'd like to start with Karen because of her background in digital technology and her current role as e-consultant in the British Council. What do you think the positive role of digital technology can be in teacher education here? And how do you think the negative impact can be prevented? Karen?
Yep. So I think, as I talked a little bit before, when we do face-to-face training for 5 days or 3 days or even a day, it can be very, very intense. And so one of the positive roles of digital for me is the ability to deliver shorter amounts of training over a longer period of time. And I think that can really enable a lot of learning where there's time to reflect in between, time to implement, time to practice, time to come back together again and have the next little bit of learning and then go and practice. And I think that is invaluable for deeper learning that is embedded over a longer period of time. And what was the second part of the question? Sorry.
The second part was digital technology can lead to exclusion and inequity. Yep. So how can we prevent that?
That is very, very true. I mean, on one side, digital can include a lot of people because there are a lot of aspects of digital that can help people with a number of difficulties, closed captions or more of a visual. But yes, it can also exclude a lot of people, and that needs to go into the planning stage of the process of moving things into digital. And perhaps it might mean that some budgets might need to be rediverted, or organizations talk to each other more with telecom or communications to be able to provide more data, or abilities for people to share devices or have places where people can come together where there is more sharing of devices. Coupled with that is doing some research on where people are at in terms of their digital provision and their digital literacy as well.
Okay, yeah, very good advice there. Okay, so can I move on to ask Sankey in a role of teacher, trainer and project manager to comment on the potential role digital technology has to play in improving observation and feedback practices?
Yes, thank you, Leslie. I think in many ways we're in a much better place than we were when I first started doing teacher training, and we wanted to get teachers to do self-assessment. Role of setting up the video camera with the tripod and getting the sound right, and then playing that back on a VCR. And now all you have to do is hold up your mobile phone, and you can film. I mean, we've seen that politically too with Black Lives Matter. That's because everybody's got one of these. So I think we can exploit that. For example, if a class teacher can be in a face-to-face situation in their bubble, but a supervisor or an observer can't come, then it's quite easy at least to capture the teaching with a mobile phone. And because that's quite a large document, there is a lot of new and fairly easy to access technology where you just send a link. You transfer the file to a computer, you send a link in Google. So you're not sending a massive file, you send the link to your supervisor on the link. And the beauty of that is that, I don't know how many of us have been in an observing situation where you were with the teacher and counting how many girls and how many boys, and you missed the first 10 minutes of the lesson. You weren't sure whether they checked the objectives or not. Recording, you can always rewind and go and have a look at it again. You can focus on certain things. as many times as you like. So in some ways, the recording of a class is maybe a more reliable tool. And what I'm talking about, this standardization and more objectivity, it does increase objectivity. And then further to that, let's take a situation where the entire class is online on, for example, Zoom platform. Well, it's very easy just to press record. And the whole lesson is recorded, including the breakout rooms. And that document, again, can be sent a link and an observer if they weren't able to participate in the online class as it happened, can watch a recording. So I do see that there are even wider than that, and going back to some of the things that Karen has already said, with TV and radio, if you are a big organization like the NIE, or I'm not sure the British Council has that kind of in COVID times, but I'm working currently with the Department of Official Languages. They have their own television studio. So let's not forget, in this environment, we can use televisions. It doesn't all super modern digital. It can be old-fashioned blended with in print materials, and that's not so much about observation and feedback, but that's just more in my comment more in general. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And Bimali, can I ask you to comment on the potential role of digital technology in development and assessment of speaking and listening skills, a task that the Ministry is about to launch into?
Yeah, I think I see a lot of potentials in this, especially in the post-COVID situation where people are going online. I see there are a lot of potentials in teaching listening and speaking. For example, when we think of listening, now the teacher has become the listening resource, because there is a lot of teacher talk going on when we do online lessons, and the teacher can be the model. So I think that there is a possibility to explore this opportunity, because now students are not listening to just their English teacher. Probably they're listening to several teachers, and then they might be using the internet more. And also not just the internet, it's like the TV and the radio. So there are a lot of resources now that students may not have used in the pre-COVID situation. So I think that's something that we can explore more. And listening activities can actually be designed based on the teacher talk when teacher is delivering so many lessons online. And also another thing that we can think of, especially in a context like Sri Lanka, is like, not just using the internet. We can include TV and radio, probably like in combination. So then different modes are used. So then some students may not drop out from the lessons. As well as, I think, there are a lot of potentials for students to do their self-assessment online by using like online resources when it comes to listening. As well as speaking, I see a lot of opportunities using digital technology. For example, now when we deliver face-to-face speaking activities, the amount of feedback that we can give is limited. So either teacher has to jot down the issues that learners face, and it's really difficult in a larger classroom. But when we deliver online lessons, online speaking, there is this option of recording. So the teacher can easily record whatever the students say, and then offer feedback even individually later on, because the recording is available. So I think we need to explore all these possibilities more and more now. Also, I think in delivering online lessons, now teacher can use options such as chat rooms in Zoom to design group tasks, and also even chat windows to offer feedback and communicate with learners. Also, in a way, I feel that these delivering online speaking lessons in a way that reduces learners' anxiety, because they are not in a larger class where a lot of people are watching. So they might be more relaxed in their own homes and speak speak more. Again, I think self-assessment is possible. So what I see is like there are several possibilities for both teachers and learners when it comes to teaching and teaching listening and speaking, as well as assessing listening and speaking. Now, for example, teaching pronunciation. So I think it's easier to show the movement of the mouth when you're teaching online. So you can get closer to the camera and show the variations. So there are a lot of different things that we can do when we think of that. Also, I think it's important to talk about teacher training, because now we are talking about teacher educators, and there are a lot of MOOCs available, and not just MOOCs. So we can make self-learning modules available online for teachers that they can access on their own time, even like from their mobile phone. So we can make listening and speaking activities available, and also there are so many resources on the internet like TED Talks. So there are a lot of possibilities now. But I understand the question of teachers that all students do not have access to all this. So one thing is, as I mentioned, combining different things together. So TV, radio, text messaging, internet, all together in combination. So then at least they will have one mode, access to one of those modes. And also, I think, like Karen mentioned, community resources, like sharing resources within a community. I'm sure you must have heard of this experiment of Sugata Mitra. They placed a computer in a public place in New Delhi, and the results was that kids learned using how to use a computer on their own. So whenever they pass the computer, they just use the computer, and that's how they learned it. So I don't think it's impossible, even in the Sri Lankan context. There are possibilities, but we need to be a bit innovative and think of using the available resources and making at least some resources available to the community, so then there can be more community sharing.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for that, Bimali. I know Karen wants to add something to what you were saying.
I did, if that's okay, just very briefly. It was something that Bimali's touched on quite a lot, this idea of what for me has become very clear over the last few months with this move to online is the importance of learner autonomy. And I think, Bimali, you were talking about that quite a lot. And, you know, we're putting a lot more responsibility onto the learners by giving them a whole bunch of tools. So we mustn't forget to also help the learners know what to do with them and how to become more autonomous, so they can take that learning themselves and find the opportunities for themselves. So that learner autonomy is now coming into its own. That's all I wanted to say.
Okay. Okay, thanks, Karen. Okay, okay. According to our facilitator, Renali, we have time for one more question before we go to the Q&A. So let me ask you this one. Okay, this is a short one. Imagine that you were speaking to a secondary school student in her last year in school who's thinking of becoming an English teacher. Okay, how would you inspire her in this field? What would you say, just very briefly, to her? Let's start with Psyche. What would you say to her?
Well, career. I spent the first half of my career as a teacher, and then I became a project manager, and I went from 200 people a day loving me to 200 people a day hating my guts because suddenly I was in a different role. I think it's great to be in the classroom. That's why I've returned to. I've given up project management and I've become and a consultant again, because just so affirming. I think it's a joy and to see people develop, to see children develop, to see adults develop. They start with you and they can't do any of it, and by the end of the course they are so empowered. I think that's fantastic. I just want to pass on my just for that, to motivate them. I love it.
Okay. Yeah, I would completely agree with you. I so miss teaching. I'm quite happy when I get back into the classroom. Mali, what would you say?
Oh, well, I
To the
think I can say that take me as an example. Because I started as a teacher and I enjoyed it a lot. And then I think sometimes there is this, sometimes people think, you know, you have to be a native speaker to be a good English teacher, but I don't think that's the case. So I think, you know, like, anybody who is enthusiastic can become an English teacher, and then it's a very rewarding experience. You meet different type of students, different people, and also you get to know a lot of different people from different fields and experts in different fields. Now, if we look at who is here, you know, somebody is very good in digital technology and somebody is very good in teacher education. So there are different expertise. So I think overall it's a very rewarding experience.
Okay. Yeah, I would totally agree with that as well. Karen, what do you think? What would you say? Sorry.
Well, I would say, coming from a digital point of view, that how lucky you are. Now is the time that a lot of innovation is going to take place. I know Leslie doesn't agree, but for a young person, I know you've embraced a lot. For a young person now, coming into a digital era is so exciting, because I think for some of us older generation, we've got the remembrance of the past and the new changes, whereas the younger generation now are coming straight into a digital world and can move straight forward with that. So I would say exciting times ahead.
Okay, yeah, I agree with that as well. Right, I think we're all on the same. Right, okay, what am I doing now? I'm handing back over to Renali, who's been having a look at the chat, and I think she has some questions for you. I think, where is she? Renali, are you there?
Leslie, can you?
Renali?
Hi.
Yes, I can hear you.
Oh,
Hi.
wonderful. Hi. Okay. So I think everybody who attended the session had a great time, because when you look at the comments, there's a great sense of enjoyment and appreciation. So I just wanted to say that. There was one question that said, SLELTEC is the fruit of ITESL, and will the project be extended for another term?
Okay, I think that's probably to me.
Yes.
Wouldn't it be? I think the ITESL project is still continuing. We are certainly continuing for another year. That's confirmed. Where we'll go after that, we don't know, but certainly we are continuing, because we are moving on to work on speaking and listening, and the challenge that Bamali was talking about. So we're the British Council and the Ministry of Education are working together on that and taking that forward. So one more year, and hopefully longer. But you know, I guess the main aim in ITESL is to hand over everything to the ministry and to hand over to the teacher educators after they have been trained. And we now have a strong cohort of Sri Lankan master trainers in both the pre-service and the in-service sectors. So really, it's, we have one more year and we'll be doing some delivery on speaking and listening. But really, it's time probably for the project to finish then and to hand over to the people that have been trained to continue their delivery, I guess is what I would say. Renali?
Okay. Would anybody else like a go on that? Or shall I move on? I'm moving on. Okay.
Yeah.
Then they're talking about the monitoring process for ITESL. There's a lot to do with the M&E, which is the monitoring and evaluation, and that there are gaps to be filled. How can this be addressed?
Okay. Again, that's connected very specifically to the project. There are certainly gaps to be filled, and we will be working on that. I'm not too sure which particular gaps are being referred to. Generally.
Yeah, I mean, they didn't specify.
Yeah, okay. Certainly one thing that we haven't as yet done, and we would like to do on ITESL, is to link the monitoring and evaluation of teachers through from the pre-service sector to the in-service sector, and have a kind of very smooth connection. I mean, what Psyche was talking about, and Bimali were talking standardizing observation and feedback, and having that whole process run from to start in the National Colleges of Education, so that when trainee teachers come through the system, they are monitored and evaluated in the same way as when they reach the in-service sector and they go into the schools, and that evaluating process is continued in the school system. And I think somebody, can't remember who mentioned, maybe it's Karen, mentioned the project was very successful in using SurveyMonkey as an observation tool when the ISAs went and monitored the teachers in schools. Now, we did that on a very small scale, but the feedback we got on it was very positive. Now, I think that kind of thing could be much expanded, and a system built around it, so that you could take that from pre-service into in-service and have a whole system that follows, the same criteria being assessed, and it being a much more developmental process rather than an evaluative process, whereas Psyche was saying you kind of get hit over the head. You don't really want to develop because you're so scared of the evaluation. So I think in that sense, gaps can be filled. I would really like to see that whole process integrated. I think it would benefit teacher educators, it would benefit teachers. And Psyche wants to say something?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, just to build on that briefly, I think another step towards exactly what you're saying is to start with a list of criteria that everyone can agree on, and that we can standardize people on. At the moment, the kind of observation forms I'm using are really quite extensive with a lot of notes in them. And so to make that much more accessible to ISA, to find agreement between the National Colleges of Education and the ISA. People are working really in the school system, and people in the colleges who are not, let's be honest. To get agreement between the two groups, I think that the way forward is to start with a much shorter list of core criteria and get those agreed on, and build from a core outwards.
Thank you, Psyche. In fact, they had picked up on that, and that was in the comments, that there is a need for uniformity and also to maintain a documentation of the history, of a particular student or a process, so that, it can be applied. Okay, moving on. I'm going to ask this question. With the exception of a couple of universities, in the field of English language teacher education in Sri Lanka, the key institutions are the MOE, the NIE, the Provincial Departments of Education, and the NCOEs. Do these institutions need to change in order to teach learners the skills and knowledge they're going to need in the economic landscape post-COVID-19? And if so, how? Do you want me to repeat any part of that?
Yes, please.
Okay. So it said, with the exception of a couple of universities in the field of English language teacher education in Sri Lanka, the key institutions are the MOE, the NIE, the Provincial Departments of Education, and the NCOEs. Do these institutions need to change in order to teach learners the skills and knowledge they're going to need in the economic landscape post-COVID-19? And if so, how? I think, Bimali, you were touching on a lot of what the rural areas would be experiencing in this kind of environment. So would you like to take a crack at that question?
Okay, I think so. What they have been doing so far is great, but if I go back to my own topic, listening and speaking challenge, I think there need to be some things done. For example, like I mentioned earlier, that so we need to decide on certain things now. There are regional variation. So are we going with the same model or not? So I think there are decisions to be taken on how we deliver teacher training, and also what model that we are implementing when it comes to school level. So I think there should be some discussions on that, as well as, for example, we are talking about going online. Or blended face-to-face plus some distance mode teaching, distance mode learning. So then I think there should be a discussion on how these things should be delivered, and how to design materials. So there should be a discussion on the new approach now. So I think it's difficult to give a direct answer to this question, because it's a broad question, and we need to think of so many things, and also the economic possibilities and impossibilities at the moment. And if we design huge teacher training programs, do we have the capacity to deliver those, either face-to-face or even online? So do we have enough funding to launch such a project? So those things actually matter. So those things need to be considered. And I think it's also important to prioritize what's the most important thing now. And probably if we are going ahead like this for few years, the post-COVID situation where social distancing is needed and sometimes lockdown might be needed. So at this stage, how can we utilize our resources? Is it just for teacher training, or is it to provide at least some resources for communities, especially to rural areas? So what's the priority now? So I think that's one of the things we need to think about now.
Can I add a point there?
Yes, please.
It's connected to the teacher training that Benalia is talking about. So recently I was talking to some teacher trainers who are delivering teacher training online, but they're training teachers how to teach face-to-face in an online environment. So it's very confusing. So if teacher training is going online, the content needs to match what the teachers will be doing. And I think at the moment there's a bit of a mismatch between what's happening in the colleges and what's happening in the schools.
Thank you. Psyche, would you like to add to that?
I think that's
Okay.
No, I think that's a good point, Karen. I think to go back to the original question and a post-COVID economy, I would say, well, look, let's use this as a way of getting the NIE to update their whole world view and certainly their Sri Lankan view of skills for the 21st century economy. Really look at the English language materials in textbooks, and are those is that the appropriate curriculum for the economy? And if it's not, what needs to be done? So to actually use this time for the NIE to do some research, to have a look at which core skills in, for example, reading and writing are the ones that you need for working online, which core skills in listening and speaking are the ones that you need for this kind of event or business through Skype, Zoom, Teams. And many of the core skills are the same, but then need to be linked with the technology. So I think it's a great time to take a shift to get a perspective on curriculum.
Thank you. And thank you to everyone who posted questions. I think we've kind of covered pretty much what was asked. Leslie, would you like to take over?
Okay. Yes, sorry for disappearing. My internet just disappeared. Anyway, okay, I'd now like to just take a moment to bring this event to a conclusion, which seems a shame. However, I'd like to say thank you to everyone, to Jill for her welcome, to our presenters and panelists, Shashi, Psyche, Bimali and Karen for their stimulating contributions, to our conference commentators for their words of appreciation, to our SLELTEC committee, to our British Council team for putting everything together, and of course, last but not least, to you, the audience, for joining us this evening. The feedback that was collected post-conference was overwhelmingly positive. Participants and presenters alike called for another conference in 2021. The SLELTEC committee is certainly in favour of this. Whether this will be a virtual conference or a face-to-face conference, only time will tell. Everyone involved would welcome the opportunity to work towards another teacher educator conference next year. So watch this space. This recording will be up on our British Council website early next week. The proceedings will go live this evening, so if you want to go and check them out, check out our website. If you would like a certificate of participation, please copy the link from the chat, complete the feedback quiz, and we will forward you a certificate. Goodbye, thanks again, and have a good evening. Thank you. Bye. Bye.